Shilo. I'd like to hold the workshop for the third time. In preparation for Yom Yerushalayim, the we'll be speaking about Aliyah Har Bayit. Just quick thanks to the four hosts, Jonathan Druckmann, Elisha Goldstein, Louis Kesselman, and Jason Mark, who have let us use their space. Thank you very much.
Yes, I also wish to join with Joshua, thanking Balei Habayit, Potachim V'chvod Achsanya. So let me begin by asking you, who here is familiar with the book Sefer HaToda'ah? Yes, Rav Eliyahu Kitov. Haven't heard of it, the rest of you? That's interesting. Maybe that's a sign of the times, or at least an indication that I'm getting older. When I was younger, Sefer HaToda'ah was a very popular sort of general layman's book describing the year, the Jewish year, the Hagim, and what have you. And I happen to know one of the sons of Rav Eliyahu Kitov, the author of that book. His name is Rav Oded Kitov. And about 20 years ago, I was speaking to him. And I should point out that Rav Eliyahu Kitov was not someone that you could fit simply, easily into one of the standard boxes. He was not Dati Leumi, he was not Haredi. He was quite decidedly, firmly and unequivocally somewhere in between, and not at all, not easily defined. And the same is true for his children, at least the ones that I know. And so this Rav Oded Kitov, with whom I was speaking, he dresses in Haredi garb, always has, as far as I know, including the hat, the whole uniform of the Haredi world. But in fact, he's not a real Haredi. I hope he doesn't mind me saying this now, and I hope this doesn't get out to the wrong circles, but he's not really Haredi, neither was his father, because he sees through the how should we put it? He sees through the smokescreen, I think it would not be unfair to say, of the Haredi world. By this I do not mean that he says Halel with the bracha on Yom HaAtzmaut, which I don't think he does. Maybe, I think he probably says without a bracha, but not with a bracha. So it's not as if he's a Dati Leumi or Merkaz Aravnik in a sheep in wolf's clothing. That's not the case. He's just a very interesting and open-minded person, and he's a Tamil Chachamim. And we were talking about various things, and he said to me, you know, the Haredim are very pleased that the Chilonim exist. They're very happy that there are Chilonim in the world. Why, I asked? Because, he says, that way there's someone to run the country, the Medina, to worry about all these things that running a Medina requires. And they don't have to worry about it, and they can deal with only certain limited areas of Jewish life with which they are familiar. In other words, those areas of Jewish life which are the day-to-day existence of Jews in the Galuth, and everything else that's beyond that, which is something that the Haredi world doesn't really understand very well, because it doesn't say in the Shulchan Aruch how to run a country, for example. They're quite happy that there's someone else who either they know how to do it, or at least they claim to know how to do it. Here I could add parenthetically that based on what we see going on as we speak now in the Knesset, and based on the fact that within a few hours or something we may discover that we're will be required, or at least it will be offered, the possibility will be offered to us to vote yet again. It seems that the Chilonim don't actually know how to run a country, so it seems to me quite obvious, and there is much room for improvement in that area as well. But at least he said to me, the Haredim really, the Medina is a headache. It's something that needs to be there, yes, they accept that, but it's a headache, and Baruch Hashem, the Chilonim who will deal with it. And that's what he said to me. And this is a man wearing a black Haredi hat, and a person who went to Haredi yeshivot. And the reason I'm relating this story to you, is because something similar can be said about Har HaBayit. Here too, the Chiloni world, this is something we'll discuss perhaps a bit more in detail later, the Chiloni world immediately after Yerushalayim, or parts of Yerushalayim, the main part of Yerushalayim, and Har HaBayit were conquered in Milchemet Sheshet Hayamim, in Tafshin Kaf Zayin. Very quickly, the Chiloni establishment that was running the country, and this is in the good old days when Mapai were running the country, Miflaget Havodah and Moshe Dayan and Levi Eshkol and the whole Chavura, they very quickly got rid of this terribly hot potato called Har HaBayit. In actual fact, I have a book here in my bag, which if we have a chance, maybe I'll show you later. It's the third volume of the collected writings of Shabtai ben Dov. You may or may not have heard about this. Okay, you know what? Perhaps pass me this book here. Oh, it's not my bag. I'm sorry. It's here. All right. Let's see. There's a picture here which some of you may not be able to see from way back there. This is a picture of the Golden Dome on Har HaBayit on Kaf Het Be'iyar Tafshin Kaf Zayin. Literally a few hours after the area was recaptured. And what you can't see very clearly at the very top, there's an Israeli flag, and that's why in the corner here it was enlarged. This little part of the photograph was enlarged, so you can see there's actually an Israeli flag flying over Har HaBayit, over the dome. But it only flew over the dome for a few hours, literally for a few hours. And it was very hastily, and with a great sigh of relief, it was taken down by Moshe Dayan and the rest of his cronies, because this was something that, as far as they were concerned, this was the last thing they needed. Har HaBayit, which immediately takes us straight back to concepts like Malchut Yisrael and the Mikdash and the Sanhedrin and all sorts of things that they really did not want to talk about. And didn't want anybody else to talk about either. They were very eager to have someone else take it off their hands. And they, of course, had someone all prepared, ready to go to take it off their hands. There's someone called the Waqf HaMuslimi, the so-called Muslim trust, or however it's translated. A Waqf is a kind of hekdesh. And they were running the place before, and they very hurriedly gave the keys right back to them, took down the flag, and said, "You deal with it. We don't want to deal with it." And here again is a perfect example of the Chilonim doing the Haredis' dirty work. Just as you need a Medina, but someone has to run, and we'd rather not deal with it, so let them deal with it. Baruch Hashem, they're willing to do it. Here too, they're willing to take it off out of the hands of the Jewish world and out of the hands of the Torah world. Not that the Torah world was at all ready, prepared, or able to deal with it, but they didn't even give them a chance, in actual fact. And this is exactly why the Israeli government, within hours, had that flag removed, handed the keys right back. They actually had the keys. They handed them back to the Waqf and said, "We have no interest in this place. You do with it what you wish." If you need further proof that this was the mindset, and this was what was going on in the minds of the various groups and sectors within Israeli society at that time, I'll mention two other facts that you need to know. One is that almost immediately after Milchemet Sheshet Yamim, the Moetzet Harabun Tarashit, the Council of the Chief Rabbinate, there is such a body. I don't know how many of you are familiar with the fact that there is such a body, and I'm sure none of you can tell me even one decision taken by this body in the last 30 years, and there's a reason for that, because it's really quite irrelevant, this body, and that's a fact. And one of the reasons it's a fact is precisely illustrated by what I'm about to tell you. Immediately within the days, they put out they published a Psak Halacha. It was actually published as a kind of poster that was glued to walls, that entering Har HaBayit is asur, and it's asur hamur, asur kareth. No one can enter Har HaBayit. That's one fact you need to know. Another fact, second fact, is that Misrad HaDatot, right, Israel's religious affairs ministry, or something like that, I suppose that's how it's translated. Within Misrad HaDatot, by the way, it should be mentioned, and this is all very relevant, I'm telling you. I hope you understand what I'm telling you is very relevant. It's much more relevant than us taking out maps and blueprints and start looking at all kinds of topographical and architectural facets of Har HaBayit, which is something we can't possibly do in the time at our disposal. That would require tens of hours of discussion. But the head of Misrad HaDatot, Sarah Datot, at that time was, anyone know? Dr. Zerah Vahaftik. Heard of that name? All right. Well, he was one of the heads of the Mafdal, if you recall a party by that name. The Mafdal, and the national, what they call it? Miflaga Datit Leumit, right? Which eventually became at some point something else, and then eventually became a Beit Yehudi, and I'm not quite sure what it is now, and I'm sure anybody actually knows. The Mafdal at that time, which was a part of both of the political establishment, in other words, for 29 years they were in coalition governments with Mapai, and they were also part of the religious establishment. Keep in mind, at that time, in Tarshin Kafzai, 1967, the Rabbanut HaRashit was entirely under their control, not like today. Today, the Rabbanim Rashiyim come from the Haredi world, and therefore also almost all the manpower that works within this organization all come from the Haredi world. That wasn't the case at the time. They all came from the more Zionist-inclined part of the rabbinical world. So you had Rabbanim like Rav Nisim, and later you had Rav Goren, for example. So the Mafdal was entirely entrenched and part of the establishment, the political and the religious establishment. Sarah Datot was the head of the Mafdal, Dr. Zerah Vahaftik. He turned to the head of the Muslim department of Misrad HaDatot and asked him to write up to formulate some sort of sign that would be placed on the entrances, on the gates to Har HaBayit. And what did these, and here I'm going to have to read to you a couple more lines from this book, because all this is reproduced here. This is the sign. This is the text of the signs that were placed by the Israeli government, by Misrad HaDatot, by Dr. Zerah Vahaftik of the Mafdal, on the entrances to Har HaBayit. Medinat Yisrael, Misrad HaDatot. Kahal HaMevakrim b'shetach HaMisgad. Are you listening? I repeat. Kahal HaMevakrim b'shetach HaMisgad. Those who wish to enter this mosque facility, mitbakesh lemaleh hahoraot habaot, is requested to abide by the following. And it talks about not smoking in the area, and it talks about women dressing modestly in the area, and it talks about not bringing pets and animals into the area, not eating and drinking. B'shetach hamisgad, this is what it says. It says asur le'echol v'lishtot b'shetach hamisgad. And it's signed Yaakov Yehoshua Menahel HaMachlaka HaMuslimit of Misrad Datot. Now what does all this tell you? You couldn't really ask for any clear indication of how the Israeli establishment, including the religious establishment, how they regarded this hot potato, Har HaBayit, that had just landed in their laps. They really had not prepared for this. They were intellectually, psychologically, spiritually unprepared for this and unwilling to even contemplate dealing with this thing. It certainly didn't even occur to them, apparently, that this was not a misgad as far as we're concerned. It's not a shetach v'misgad, it's something quite different, and the misgad shouldn't be there. But from their point of view, the easiest solution was to put up the signs saying that this is a misgad, or a misgad with certain grounds around it, and it's a Muslim area, and therefore please behave appropriately. And under their breaths to say to themselves, thank God for that, we don't have to deal with that anymore, and leave it in the hands of the Muslims. And that's where it is today. Things haven't changed. Well, actually, to be more precise, one thing did change, and that's why this all appears in this book. Because Shabtai ben Dov, and I'm assuming that many of you have not heard of this name before, Shabtai ben Dov, in his youth, was a fighter in the Lehi. He was captured by the British. He was imprisoned for 6 years until the establishment of the state. He also happens to have been a genius of historical proportions, in my view. He was a prolific writer, and I'm speaking about thousands of pages of printed, collected writings, which don't include all of his writings. And each page of which requires intellectual effort to actually read through the page. So we're talking about a genius. He became a lawyer by profession, but only by profession, because one has to make a living. But and also he is intellectually inclined, to understand law and Talmud, etc. A very interesting individual. He was, of course, flabbergasted by the fact that this is what Misrad Datot had just done. This is immediately after the events of the Six-Day War. So already in the month of Sivan, immediately after the war, he approached two lawyers, and Yanovsky, I think by name, and father and son, and they prepared, together with him, an appeal to the Bagatz against Sarah Datot, against Dr. Zerach Varhaftik, claiming that why would he describe this place as a Muslim holy site, without any reference to the fact that it's a holy site to the Jews, not to mention that it's Makom Beit HaMikdash. And you have to understand that was one aspect of the Atira, which of course was eventually rejected by the Bagatz. No great surprise there. As you see, things have not changed. They've only got worse, but they haven't changed. But as a result of this Bagatz, of this appeal to the High Court, something did change, in actual fact. Those signs describing the area as a Muslim holy site were removed in short order, because before the court actually got to the point of, the court did give a temporary order against Sarah Datot to explain his actions. But before they actually got to the hearing, they understood that they would have a bit of a problem in the court. So they removed those signs, and they did one other thing. They opened up Shara Mugrabim. You know what Shara Mugrabim is? It's the gate above the Kotel on the right, where that ramp was built many years ago. That wasn't open till that point. You have to understand, till that point, before this appeal to the High Court was initiated by Shabtai ben Dov, the Waqf, Barov Chutzpatam, they charged an entrance fee. You had to buy a ticket from the Waqf to enter Har HaBayit, any part of Har HaBayit. You couldn't walk through any of the gates without buying a ticket and paying. And again, because of this Bagatz, certain people began to understand that this was not probably going to go things were not going to go in their favor, not altogether anyhow, in the court. So that was immediately changed. The decision was taken, I believe, by Moshe Dayan, because he felt the ground burning under his feet, that Shara Mugravim would be open to all people, even Jews, and they wouldn't have to buy a ticket. So the fact that we're here discussing Haknisa Harabayt Al Pi Torah, the fact that we can discuss if it's possible or not, or whether it's allowed, or is there a problem to go into Harabayt, has everything to do with this appeal to the Bagatz. There wouldn't be anything to discuss. You'd have to buy a ticket from the Waqf, and they may not let you in either. Why would they, if they're in charge? So the decision was taken that Shara Mugravim will be open to all, and that the Israeli police will be in charge of that gate, and really other gates as well, but in a very sort of low-key fashion, really allowing the Waqf to call the shots, which is what they do to this day. So you understand from all of this that both the political establishment in Israel, and even more obviously and more seriously the religious establishment, the vast majority of the Rabbanim, etc., were not only not pleased by the fact that Harabayt had been recaptured, reconquered, they were actually quite dismayed by the fact. They were dismayed because now, if it's now in our hands, we're going to be asked all kinds of questions. Can we go? Can we set up a Beit Knesset in Harabayt? Can we build a Mikdash? Maybe. Why not? I mean, isn't that what it's for? What about a Korban Pesach? There are all kinds of issues. Speaking of a Korban Pesach, by the way, you might like to know that over 200 years ago, there was, for various historical reasons, there was a certain reawakening in the Jewish world, or all of a sudden there was a bit more awareness of Eretz Yisrael and Harabayt. Why this took place at that time? Well, it was around that time that certain Jews from Europe, Talmidim of the Baal Shem Tov and Talmidim of the Gra, came to Eretz Yisrael. Not huge numbers, but nevertheless it was a step, it was a development, a new development in Jewish history, and it brought in its wake certain discussions about what does this mean? Does it mean anything? What do we do about this fact? So you may be, or may not be, I don't know, you may be surprised to know that if you look up Shut Chatam Sofer, the Teshuvot of Halacha of the Rabbi Moshe Sofer, the famous Chatam Sofer, in Helek Yoreh De'ah, Siman Resh Lamed Vav, you will find there a teshuvah written by him to his father-in-law, Rabbi Akiva Eiger. We're talking about two of the greatest Chachamim of that generation, whose names are to this day very famous. The whole world, the whole Torah world learns their writings, their books to this day. You'll find Rabbi Akiva Eiger on every daf in the Talmud Bavli, the Gilyon HaShas, and the Chatam Sofer is a standard book of his Teshuvot and his Perushim, a standard fare in the Torah world. Rabbi Akiva Eiger, who was actually only about 10 months older than the Chatam Sofer, he was also his father-in-law, but it's a long story. He wrote to him and asked him the following question: if the Ottoman Sultan was to give permission for us to build a Mizbeach and bring a Korban Pesach on Harabayt, would we be able to do so? Is it halachically feasible? The Chatam Sofer's response was, absolutely yes. He went through a number of issues that were raised about Tumat Met, about if you require shkalim from the tzibur for a Korban Pesach, whether the Kohanim have to prove that they're Kohanim, certain other issues that were raised already before their time. He goes through these issues, and his answer is a resounding yes. We would be able, and we would be therefore required, we would be hayavim to bring a Korban Pesach. Yet again, the Jewish world was saved from this calamity because the Ottoman Sultan didn't really like the idea. So we didn't have to deal with it. But the question was asked, and that was the answer. Interestingly enough, if you search in Tafshin Kav Zayin, Tafshin Kav Het, Tafshin Kav Tet, 67, 8, 9, See who wrote about such a possibility at that time. Were the Rabbanim up in arms and very excited? What are we going to do about Korban Pesach? Is it an issue? What should we do? Should we demand the government allow us to do it? You won't find such discussions. There were only a handful of people, Shabtai ben Dov was one of them. There were only a handful of people, and I'm not sure any of them were Rabbanim, who even raised such ideas. So all this paints a rather bleak picture, if you think about it. The picture is actually very, very depressing. That here you have Har HaBayit, and we actually find ourselves in charge of Har HaBayit once again. Not that the government of the day planned it that way, they didn't. And they were quite eager to be rid of it, as we said, and they were very eager to cut some deal with King Hussein and sign a peace treaty. That was their idea of what should be done with it. So they hadn't planned for it, and they didn't need this headache. And if one thinks about someone like Moshe Dayan, well, it's understandable why he didn't his response, his approach to Har HaBayit was such. But if you think about great Rabbanim, it's more of a question. It's more disturbing. Why is this? Now I will try and answer that question a little bit later. What we're going to do now is look at some of the sources before you, simply to prove the simple point that Har HaBayit is not cut. It's not all of Har HaBayit is not cut from the same cloth. So let's look at the Mishnah. The Mishnah in Masechet Kelim, it's the first source you have there. It says as follows: Eser Kiddushot hen. There are 10 levels of Kiddusha in Eretz Yisrael, or in the world actually. Eretz Yisrael mikudashat mikol ha'arasoth. Eretz Yisrael is on a higher level of Kiddusha than all other countries. And then the Mishnah goes on to describe in which way this manifests itself. And it says, "Shemevi'im mimena ha'omer v'bikurim u'shtei alehem." In other words, you can't bring the omer from grain grown outside Eretz Yisrael. It has to be brought from grain grown in Eretz Yisrael. The same is true of bikurim. You can't bring bikurim from your fig tree in Turkey. Even though in Turkey there are plenty of figs, as we all know, because all the figs we have, almost all the figs you can buy here and today are from Turkey. But you can't bring bikurim from such figs because they don't come from Eretz Yisrael. The next level, ayaroth mukafot homar mukudashot mimena. They are on a higher level. Shemesharahim itocham lesora'im. People who suffer from sarath may not live within an ir mukefet choma, a walled city. But they are allowed, a person who dies, they don't have to immediately remove the corpse from the city. The next paragraph, this is all a number of mishnayot of halachot in Masechet Kelim, one after the other. We're talking here about Yerushalayim now. Yerushalayim is also a walled city, but it's a special walled city. From the wall and into the city itself, in other words, as opposed to outside the walls, within the walls, ochalim sham kodashim kalim u'ma'aser sheni. In order to eat ma'aser sheni, or for that matter Korban Pesach, you have to be within Yerushalayim. The next level, Har HaBayit mekudash mimenu. Har HaBayit is a higher level than the rest of Yerushalayim. She'en zavim u'zavot, nidoth u'yoledot, nichnasim lasham. Menstruant women, or women who've given birth, etc., may not, and also a zav, a man suffering from ziva, may not enter Har HaBayit. But you will note, it doesn't say anything about a person who is tamemeth, a person who has come into contact with the dead in some way. That's not mentioned here. That's mentioned in a moment. Ahel, which is a certain area within Har HaBayit, which is fenced off. The hell is the name of the fence. Mekudash mimenu was on a higher level. She'en goyim u'tamemeth nichnasim l'sham. Goyim, non-Jews, and Jews who are tamemeth may not enter from the hell and beyond. So what do you see from this Mishnah already? That Har HaBayit itself is a large part of what we call Har HaBayit, has the halachic kedusha, the halachic status of what's called here Har HaBayit. It's only certain parts of Har HaBayit that have a higher halachic status. The kedusha is greater, and there Tamei Meth may not enter. And seeing that therefore we assume that all of us today are Tamei Meth, so therefore there is an issue beyond going beyond the point of the hill, but going beyond. But entering Har HaBayit itself is not an issue. This is what the Mishnah tells us in plain words. And the Mishnah goes on to discuss further levels, higher and higher levels within Har HaBayit. That is to say, you have the area of the Hel, and then you have the Ezrath Nashim, and then you have the Ezrath Yisrael, and the Ezrath Kohanim, etc. What you need to know is, Halacha Ma'aseh, that you only Hayav Kareth if you're Tamei Meth, if you enter the Ezrath Kohanim, what's called the Azara, in short. If you enter that's what it says later. Only there are you Hayav Kareth. It talks about the Ezrath Yisrael and talks about the Ezrath Kohanim. So the claim, the first thing to know from these Mishnayot, and of course no one can disagree with this Mishnah, this is basic essential halacha, which is later, by the way, quoted by the Rambam. If you turn the page, Gimel, Oth Gimel, we'll go back to Beth in a moment. Oth Gimel, Rambam is posek halacha in Chot Beta Bechira Perek Zayin. Har HaBayit mekudash mimena, more than the rest of Yerushalayim, as we discussed. He's basing himself directly on the Mishnah. She'en zavin uzavot nidot v'yoladot nichnasim l'sham u'mutar lachnis hamet asmo lahar HaBayit. You are allowed to bring a dead person into Har HaBayit. Not only is a person who is nitma b'tumat meth allowed to enter Har HaBayit, as opposed, not the inner areas which we discussed, where it's asur, but that part which is known as Har HaBayit, which by the way is about 5/6 of the total area of Har HaBayit today. Alright, so the vast majority of Har HaBayit as we know it today does not, the halacha which says that Tamei Meth may not enter does not apply to the vast majority of the area. So Rambam says, Har HaBayit mekudash mimena, she'en zavin uzavot nidot v'yoladot nichnasim l'sham, u'mutar lachnis hamet atzmo lahar HaBayit, v'en sarich lomar. It's not even necessary to point out, says Rambam, Tamei Meth shehu nichnas l'sham, that a person who's Tamei Meth may enter Har HaBayit. Again, this is halacha psuka. No one can disagree with this halacha. Then he goes on to say, Ahel, which is, as we said, an area within Har HaBayit which is fenced off, mekudash mimeno, that's on a higher level, she'en goyim u'tamei meth u'vo'el nida nichnasim l'sham. So therefore, when a person comes along and says, you may not enter Har HaBayit, the first question you need to ask yourself is, why is he saying this? Why is he making no distinction between Har HaBayit, where it's obviously mutar? It's true, you have to go to a mikveh first, that's true. Men and women have to go to a mikveh before they enter Har HaBayit, true. But the fact that we're Tamei Methim today is not the issue of entering Har HaBayit. It's only an issue if you enter certain specific areas within Har HaBayit. So you have to ask yourself, what's going on here? You will often see those who say that it's asur to enter Har HaBayit, full stop, they will quote the Magen Avraham. The thing is, if you look at the Magen Avraham, what do you see? You see that what he writes is, quite correctly, that it's asur for Tamei Meth to enter the Azara, which is entirely true. And no one suggested otherwise. But Har HaBayit it's not true. So what actually is going on here? The claim of many people, certainly the majority of the rabbinical establishment today, and it's also worth pointing out that things have changed over the last 50 odd plus years. Things have changed for the better. It's a very slow, incremental and evolutionary process, but things have changed. Because today you can find quite a few very serious Rabbanim who say you can enter Har HaBayit. There are even some well-known Rabbanim who themselves go with some of their students, etc., enter Har HaBayit. So this consensus that was once wall to wall is no longer so. So those who claim that you cannot enter Har HaBayit at all, what they really are saying, if you ask them, what they'll tell you is, well, we say this because we don't know where the area that's Asur is. We're not quite sure, or we don't have a clue actually. And the second statement is actually the more accurate one. They don't have a clue. The reason they don't have a clue is simple, because they haven't learnt it. And the reason they haven't learnt it is because they really don't want to know. That's what we said before, it's a hot potato. So why deal with a very hot potato when you might get burnt if you can just ignore it? So it's ignored. Most Rabbanim have not learnt this subject. I can guarantee that to you, without any hesitation. I will also tell you, in the same breath, that I don't know exactly where these areas are, not precisely. I can't take out a map and demarcate for you precisely where exactly the area that's Asur is. What I can do, and many others can do this as well, is tell you where it certainly isn't. Where even according to the various shitoth, and there are many shitoth, if you look up the Wikipedia article in Hebrew on the Zihui Makom Har HaBayit, I think it's entitled, it talks there about a dozen different shitoth as to where exactly the Mikdash stood on the present Har HaBayit. In other words, you have this piece of real estate, so to speak, although it's not real estate. You have this area called Har HaBayit. The question is now, where exactly was the Mikdash situated on this Har HaBayit? It's not entirely obvious. Not 100%. I agree with that. I accept that. The fact that the Radbaz tells us that there's no question and no doubt about it that the Kodesh HaKodashim is where the Golden Dome stands today. But on the other hand, the Kaftor Vafera, who was 200 years before him in Eretz Yisrael, who spent a lot of time there, he spent most of his life in Eretz Yisrael, and he made it his business, his specialty in Torah study, to know everything about Eretz Yisrael. He spent his time traveling the country, and he wrote a very famous sefer called Kaftor Vafera, Rabbi David Bar-Hayim. From what he says, it seems that he doesn't think it was where the Golden Dome was, but somewhat to the south of there. How far south? That's also a good question. There are a number of shitoth as to where Har HaBayit, where the Mikdash stood precisely, and therefore where the Azara, Ezrat Kohanim was precisely, and therefore and the Kodesh HaKodashim, etc., the Hechal and the Kodesh HaKodashim, where exactly they were situated. I personally don't believe anyone who says that he knows for a fact where it was. I personally don't believe such a person, because for the very simple fact that until we are able to excavate on Har HaBayit, and we're given a free hand to dig as much as we like until we find what we need to find, which will take some time probably, but I have no doubt on the other hand that we would find what we need to find. Until we excavate on Har HaBayit, we can't be absolutely sure. We have contradicting, as I guess gave you now 2 examples, although I should point out that the position of the Radbaz, that there's no question that the Golden Dome stands on top of Kodesh HaKodashim, and that the stone, the large rock under the Golden Dome, that the Arabs refer to as Al-Sakhra, is the Evin HaShathiyah, that which the Radbaz and others write, is the majority opinion, without a question. The Hatam Sofer accepted that view, the Hazon Ish accepted that view, and many others. But to claim that it's certain, I can't tell you that. So I'm not here to tell you that I know exactly where it is. And I don't believe it will be absolutely certain until we excavate. And that, of course, is not only mutar to excavate, it's a hovah for us to excavate. We are required to do so. Why? Because until we excavate, we won't know for sure. And until we know for sure, we won't be able to rebuild the Mikdash. And we are required to build the Mikdash, so we have to excavate. That's part of the miswah of building the Mikdash. And if you ask, well, how can we excavate? How can we go into Har HaBayit with Tamei Emet? The answer to that is very simple. And the halacha, the Rambam talks about this as well. In Ot Daled, the Rambam writes, this is all based on explicit Gemaroth, right? There's nothing, no chidush of the Rambam involved here. B'sha'ah shenichnasim habanaim, when builders, people whose job it is to build, livnot u'lethaken b'heichal, who have to build or repair to maintain the heichal, even the heichal, which is the most holy part of the mikdash, or lotzim mishamet hatuma, or there's something tameh which has to be removed from there. Miswa shiur nichnasim kohanim tmimim. If possible, those who go in to do this should be kohanim tmimim. Tmimim, that is to say, without a mum. She'enam ba'alei mum. But if there's no such person, lo mas'u tamimim, yikansu ba'alei mumim. Im en sham kohanim, yikansu lewiim. Lo mas'u lewiim, yikansu Yisrael. Miswa ba'tahorim, and it should be done if possible by people who are tahor. Lo mas'u tahorim, and that's the case today because everyone is at least b'hezkath tmemeth. Lo mas'u tahorim, yikanesu tameim. Tameh u'ba'al mum, yikanes. Tameh u'al yikanes ba'al mum. Sha'tumah dehuya b'sibur. The famous halakha that the Rambam and others discuss in a number of places. There's a discussion in the Gemara and the Talmud whether Tumah Dehuya B'Sibur or Tumah Hutra B'Sibur. What is the difference? Tumah Hutra B'Sibur means that when all or majority of Am Yisrael are Tme'im, such as Tme'emeth, and therefore let's say all the Kohanim are Tme'im. So how can you do the Avodah? How can you do the Korban Tamid Shachar, Tamid Ben Harbaim? How can you do a Korban Pesach? How can you do anything? The answer is if everyone is tameh, or the majority of the kohanim, or majority of the am are tameh, then you go ahead and do all the korbanot shalat sibur, which have a fixed time. Shekavor lahem zaman. Rambam writes this elsewhere. You go ahead and do it with tumah. That's the halakha. Why? Tumah dechuya b'tzibur. If it's hutra b'tzibur, you don't even have to look for someone maybe who's tahor. But if it's dechuya, it means if it's possible, you do it with tahorim. But if not, you do it with tmeim. That is the halakha. Tumah dechuya b'tzibur. That's also the basis of the halakha, as I mentioned to you. The psak, the response that the Hatam Sefer wrote to Rabbi Akiva Eger when he said to him, yes, of course, if the Sultan were to allow us, then of course we would have to go ahead and do a Korban Pesach because Tumah Dechuya B'Tzibur. Again, this halakha psuka, no one can argue. So as I said before, what can we say with certainty? We can say with certainty where those areas of Har HaBayit where we cannot enter, as long as we're not building or excavating or maintaining the structure, as we said before, which is also part of the miswah. You have to build, and then you also have to therefore afterwards maintain it. Even if you only have someone has to paint the walls of the heichal because the paint is cracking or chipping, and you have to bring in workmen, painters to paint, which you do. If you can't find the right person to do the job who's tahor, you bring in someone who's tameh. That's the halakha. That's exactly what the Rambam mentioned here before. So if we're not building, we're not excavating, we're not preparing for the actual building of the mikdash, which is the case at present, but you want to enter the area of Har HaBayit, you can do so, but you have to know where you can't go. And we can say where you can't go. That's because it's according to all the different possibilities, there are large areas of Har HaBayit, very large areas of Har HaBayit, where it's clear that it's not one of those areas that are problematic. For example, if you enter Shara Mugrabim and you turn immediately to the left and you walk all along the inside of the Kotel HaMaravi as it were, on the other side, from south to north and back again, no matter how you consider the matter, there's no possibility of entering an area which is Asur B'Knisa. Now that's true, that's not what most people who go into Har HaBayit do. Most people enter Shara Mugrabim and make a circuit. And that's also possible, because if you go in a straight line basically from Shara Mugrabim, and then at a certain point, which is what most people do, they turn left, in other words towards the north, and they go around all the way to the north and come around again, etc. That's also, you have to really go out on a limb to claim that there's a problem with following that circuit. But if you want to be, so that's 99% certain. You want to be 100% certain, so stay on the inside of the Kotel HaMaravi, on the western side, up and down as much as you want. There's no hashash that you're entering an area which is Asur B'Knisa. So again, you have to ask yourself, if that's the case, why are most Rabbanim, certainly the Haredi world, and also a large part, not all, as I said, things are changing, but a large part of the Dati Leumi world as well, why are they disinterested, to put it mildly, if not actually opposed to any even discussion of this issue? The real reason is because the Mikdash, Har HaBayit, the Mikdash, and everything that goes with it, all the things we mentioned before, because if you think about it, if you understand these things, then as soon as you talk about Har HaBayit, you're talking about a different kind of Torah Judaism. You're talking about a Torah Judaism that has to deal with the possibility, at least, of a Korban Pesach, of bringing Korbanot every day, building a Mikdash. What about a Sanhedrin? What about a real Jewish government based on Torah principles and precepts and values? All this immediately rises to the surface, and you have to grapple with these things. And that's not what the Torah world is, most of the Torah world is trained to deal with, simply not trained to do so. And it really, much more than I think that you may appreciate, it really scares them. They're actually terrified of this thing called the Mikdash. And even in the Haredi world, this is changing, by the way. I'm personally familiar with a certain number of Haredi Talmidei Chachamim, most of them younger, but not all of them, who go on to Har HaBayit. Something that you, except for a particular Haredi family that became quite famous already some decades ago, something you couldn't have imagined 30 years ago, maybe not even 20 years ago. But I can tell you that nowadays, I can show you a Talmid Chachamim of my age, or even older than me, I think. He's actually a Hasid Gur, okay? He's a Gera Chosid. And he goes to Har HaBayit, and he's written about the subject. I can tell you about an Israeli Haredi, which is rare, because many of these Haredim are originally from the States, because people tend to have a more open mind coming from that part of the world. But even some Israeli Lamdanim amongst the Haredim are beginning to question this status quo. And that's a good thing. Baruch Hashem, it's a very good thing. I can also tell you that the son-in-law of Moshe Feinstein, Rav Moshe Tendler, has been on Har HaBayit with his son-in-law of Shabtai Rappaport and many others. Like the list is actually very long nowadays, which is a good thing. Baruch Hashem, it's a good thing. So there is some movement. So what needs to happen today to move things along? Because it's clear that something has to change here. The present situation is untenable, it's inane, and it can't possibly last forever. And it's also important to understand, as Uri Tzvi Greenberg, the famous poet, wrote, he who controls Har HaBayit eventually controls Eretz Yisrael. You cannot separate these two things. Right now we're in a situation where, as they say in Hebrew, lo livla v'lo lahaki. We're in a state of affairs where we're not ingesting this thing called Har HaBayit. We're not dealing with it, but we haven't not quite vomiting out either. It's just sort of there, stuck in our throat, and we're not sure what to do, and we're not moving with it. And that has to change, and is changing, but a very, very slow and incremental way. What has to happen is for more and more Jews to understand that the Torah of Galuth is not any kind of solution and does not have the answers for our present situation. There's no way that kind of Torah can be the proper response for our present situation. And this is exactly what terrifies most of the rabbinical establishment. Most of the rabbinical establishment is used to a certain order. They're used to viewing and dealing with Torah Judaism in a certain way, and they're familiar with some aspects of Torah Judaism and not familiar with others. And that situation is, that's their comfort zone. that's where they are at ease. They know how to deal with that, because we've been doing that for a long time. Galut no Judaism is something that the Jewish people became very adept at. But if you now have to shift into Geula mode Judaism, that requires a whole new set of assumptions, and it requires making certain decisions and assuming certain responsibilities, etc., etc. And that the standard rabbinical establishment today is not ready to do, and they won't be for a long time. Or, I think, put it more precisely, they never will be. They have to be replaced. They have to be replaced by Jews who understand that they don't have the answers, and there's no one to turn to in that establishment, and to demand or to simply set up some alternate establishment. You need Talmidei Chachamim who understand these things and who know how to think in terms of Geula mode Judaism and not Galut mode Judaism. And that's the simple message and the bottom line that we all have to take away with us from this discussion this evening. That there are those who wish to maintain Galut mode Judaism, and there are those who and they may wish to maintain Galut mode Judaism because they have nothing else to offer. They don't have an alternative. They do not have a suggestion. And there are those who at this point are in a minority, but they exist. There are those who do have the solution, who do have the approach, who have the right ideas and the knowledge. And if enough Jews, if there's a certain critical mass of Jews who make it known that the present rabbinical establishment, the Rabbut HaRashit, shall we say, which is, of all bodies in the country you can imagine, they're interested in the status quo more than anybody else. If enough Jews make it known that these people do not represent us, we're not interested in what they have to say. By the way, how many Jews do you know who follow the psakim of the Rabbut HaRashit? I don't think there is such a thing. There's no halachic system that they propose, and they don't say very, very much. And you can't find Jews who say, well, my Rav is Rav so and so, in the Rabbut HaRashit. I don't think you can find such people. Very few. Very few. The power has to shift away from those people towards those who understand that we have a great destiny to fulfill, and that it's our responsibility to make these things happen, and not to assume erroneously that things will take care of themselves. Because if you ask many of these people in the fossilized establishment, you ask them, well, what about Harabai? What about Korban Pesach? What will they say? The majority of them will tell you, we don't know, and it's Asur, Karet, this, that, and the other, without going into any of the details. And anyhow, what's the rush? It's going to fall from heaven. The Mikdash will fall from heaven one of these days. You just have to wait long enough, and they'll tell you that Rashi says so, which he does. No argument. Rashi, at least in the Gemara, says so. In his Perush on the Tanakh, there's a couple of places where it's mashma differently. But in the Talmud Bavli, in two places, in Rosh Hashanah and Sukkah, he does make such a statement. So, as some parts of British society express it, you pays your money and you takes your choice, right? If you are one of those people who believes that one day you'll wake up in the morning and hear the news at 6 o'clock that during the night a huge Mikdash complex descended upon a Harabai, swallowed up the Mizgadim, and there it is. The Mikdash is there waiting for you, and the Mashiach standing at the door with a nice, impressive staff or something and a long beard. If that's your picture of how it's going to play out, okay. Well, I'm not here. I can't possibly convince you otherwise. I think, because if you really believe that, well, all I can say is that I'm sorry for you. That's all I can say. It's not true. No Mikdash in Jewish history was ever built that way. The first Mikdash was, after all, the Mishkan. It was built by Am Yisrael in the desert. It didn't fall from heaven. Then the Mishkan existed in Eretz Yisrael for a few hundred years, 480 years to be precise, or actually 440 years, in Eretz Yisrael, until Shlomo built the first Mikdash on Har HaBayit, correct? It says in Sefer Melachim he built that 480 years after Yetziat Mitzrayim. And then you had the first Mikdash. Eventually that was destroyed. Then you had the second Mikdash that also didn't fall from heaven. Nothing fell from heaven. The idea that the Mikdash falls from heaven is an expression of Jewish dysfunctionality. That is to say, when Jews become so dysfunctional, so completely unable to break out of the galut and figure out a way of rejuvenating themselves and reconstituting the Jewish people as a viable nation, Torah nation, to do what has to be done, to return to Eretz Yisrael and to do there what has to be done. If the Jewish people fall into that state of limbo and paralysis, well then what are you going to say to yourself? How will you explain to yourself how will the Mikdash appear? Well, the only thing you have left is to say it'll fall from heaven, because you know that you can't do it. And this is exactly what one finds in a certain Parashat Shavua sheet that in actual fact was published by Rav Mordechai ben Eliyahu something like 25 or something years ago. I actually have it at home and I can actually show it to you. I'm not making this up. I saved it at the time. It was so stunning to me that I saved it. So it's from a long time ago, but it's there and I can show it to you. At a lecture less than a year ago, I actually brought it with me and I showed people so they would actually see that I'm not making this up. He wrote as follows. He was asked the question, I think it was Parashat Truma, which makes sense, right? Asuli Mikdash, it says in Parashat Truma. So the question he dealt with was, will the Mikdash fall from heaven or is it built by human beings, by us? So he said, well, Rambam says that we build the Mikdash, that it's built by Am Yisrael. And Rashi says that it falls from heaven. And yes, and that's what it says in the Zohar in many places. And he quotes 4 or 5 or 6 places from the Zohar where it says that it will fall from heaven. And then he says as follows. We see there's more than one opinion, true. And he says, seeing that I look around at Am Yisrael today and I see how things are, I see the state of affairs, I can't possibly believe that we're going to build it. So obviously my conclusion is that it has to be that it will fall from heaven. Okay, so I'm here to tell you that I don't buy that. I don't buy that. Yes, it's true. The situation is such that the Jewish people are really in a state of dysfunctionality and paralysis at this point in time. True. And it's our job to break that mold and to change that reality. And that is within our power to do. We just have to take ourselves and take the Torah and take reality seriously, deal with it in a grown-up fashion and not believe things will fall from heaven, because things don't. Not because Hashem can't make it happen, because that's not how He runs the world. And as soon as we do that, things will begin to change. So do not fall into that kind of despondency that this Rav mentioned, that, well, we obviously are not going to be able to get our act together, so we must assume it'll fall from heaven. No, that is a terrible and completely spurious conclusion. The only possible conclusion is that, yes, we have a big problem here, that the Jewish people, even the religious Jews, even the Rabbanim, for the most part, are not with the program, and therefore we have to do something about that. And that can be done by beginning to form and organize right-minded Jews into some kind of organized group of people, some kind of movement. That's something that's discussed by Shabtai Ben-Dov in his books, and it's something which I believe will have to happen at some point, B'ezrat Hashem. At this point, I will happily answer certain questions if there are. Yes?
Thank you very much.
Sure.
It seems to me you sort of touched on it, but there has to be a kind of order in which the sort of movement to Harabite happens, and it seems to me that it doesn't start at Harabite at all.
I didn't speak about a movement for Harabite.
No, not movement for Harabite. I mean, you know, the move towards building a Mikdash does not start with Harabite. It starts in terms of how, I guess what you said at the end, how Jews sort of where the rabbinic establishment is, and I don't see how it can happen without Sanhedrin. I didn't see how it can start, but that was Sanhedrin functioning.
I happen to agree with you entirely. I wasn't suggesting from it could work otherwise. But the only way to create a Sanhedrin is to create it without talking about creating a Sanhedrin. Let me explain what I mean by that. If it doesn't matter, doesn't matter if it's me or somebody else. If a group of Rabbanim get together, as happened some, I don't know, 12, 13, 14 years ago, something like that. I was entirely privy to all the goings on before and during, and if they announce, well, we're establishing a Sanhedrin, what will everybody, including serious people for the most part, what will they say? They'll chuckle. They'll think it's a joke. And almost certainly they'll be right also. Because that's not how it begins, not in my view. This is why I didn't take part in that, because I tried to explain to the people involved that this is not going to work this way. Their idea was, if you get together 71 people with a beard, and that's how things worked out. In fact, things were so pathetic that when they all got their first kenes together in Tveria, why it had to be in Tveria is another interesting question. It doesn't have to be in Tveria, but they decided it does. They couldn't find 71 people. And I wasn't there, but I was told to me by several people who were present. Their idea was, if you get 71 people on a stage on 71 chairs, and they sort of look rabbinic to some extent, and you say, well, here's a Sanhedrin, now we're in business, now we can begin doing something. Well, that's a joke. That's a very, very sad joke, in fact, because that's not at all how it works. I said to them, a Sanhedrin doesn't begin with 71, it begins with three. It begins with three very serious and unique individuals who understand what needs to be done. They have a vision. They're not daydreamers, not people who hallucinate, people who are serious, but they have a vision. And they will find another two people who are ra'ui, who are fitting and proper, who fit the bill, and they'll join them. There'll be 5, and etc. And there'll be another 2, and you'll have 7 and 9. Eventually, you can get to a Sanhedrin Ktana, which is 23. And in the fullness of time, that can become a real Sanhedrin. That's how it would work. Of course, it would be hugely helpful if the ruling powers of the day supported such an effort. But even if they didn't, because then it would really go much more smoothly and proceed much more quickly. However, even if they're not at all interested in such a thing, if you do it the right way, you will create a certain reality on the ground. And you don't do it, so I said to these people at the time, I said, you don't do it by immediately discussing things to do with Har HaBayit. Don't even talk about Har HaBayit at the beginning. So they'd ask me, so what do you talk about at the beginning? And I told them, well, I'll tell you what. And maybe you're familiar with this fact, and this is something that some people would say made me famous or infamous, going back 12 years plus now. I said to them, you start talking about kitniot. That's what I said to them, and a lot of them sort of looked at me and said to themselves, this guy's really needs some professional help. What's he talking about, kitniot? How does that help us? And I said, you don't get it. Kitniot is exactly the way to begin. In fact, Benjamin here can testify to the fact that when I first began giving a series of shiurim in Bet Shemesh many years ago, one of the first shiurim I gave was entitled the roadmap from Kitniot to Korban Pesach. That's what it was entitled. Because it's exactly how it works. You begin by breaking the Galut Mode Judaism, the mold of Galut Mode Judaism. I don't know how many of you may have heard this before. I'll get to you, but let me finish. I have to work through this issue. I don't wish to repeat myself if you've all heard it, so if you have, you can just interrupt me in the middle. But I often explain in a sort of graphic and metaphorical way. I explain the issue as follows. If you have a circle of bricks consisting of 10 bricks, or rather, if I give you 10 bricks and I say, well, make a circle out of them, that's simple enough, correct? You'll take the bricks and you'll organize them into a circle, and you'll have a circle of bricks. Fine. If I then come along and say to you, well, here's an 11th brick, add it to the circle, what are you going to do? You either have to remove one of those bricks and insert the 11th brick instead of the 10th brick, which means you'll still have only 10 bricks. You won't have a circle of 11 bricks. Or you'll have to break the entire circle and start again. You have to expand it, which means you have to move everything. Correct? You have to engineer the circle. That's exactly how it works with the Torah. Galut Judaism is a limited circle of bricks, of mitzvot, of ideas, of practices, of minhagim. If you want to move on to a higher level, to a greater, to a more authentic and much more, a much broader understanding and version of Jewish existence, you have to break that circle. If you ask why Kitniyot, I can give you a couple of reasons. First of all, it's a minhag which is based on nothing but mistakes and errors and confusion, which is not what I say. It's what all the Rishonim almost without exception say, Ashkenazi Rishonim included. And even if it were a valid minhag, you have to at some point understand, you have to appreciate the fact that when you have Jews returning to Eretz Yisrael from 100 different countries around the world with different minhagim, if you wish to now reconstitute the Jewish nation, which is what we are supposed to be doing here, surely, if you want to be a Mamlechet Kohanim V'Roy Kadosh, you don't want to just be a collection of tribes and Eidot of Jews who came from different places and continue to maintain and preserve their Galut identity as Moroccan or Hungarian or Russian or Temani Jews indefinitely. If you don't want that, but you want to somehow reconstitute a nation with a national identity and a national purpose and a national vision, which is what the Torah talks about, then you have to understand that you have to tell the Jews, well, now we all have to put halakha remains halakha. There's always room for discussion within halakha. Usually there are different opinions on many things, but minhagim are not halakha. As for minhagim, we have to put them all aside now, and we have to start creating a new Eretz Yisrael minhag for all the Jews in Eretz Yisrael. It doesn't matter if you're Sfaradi or Ashkenazi or something else. And that's exactly what the rabbinical establishment is unwilling to do and unable to do, because they were trained to think in terms of, if your father was Ashkenazi, you're locked into this system of minhagim, and if your father was from Syria or from Teman, you're locked into that system of minhagim, and you can't escape. It's like a prison. You can't get out of that. This is not true. It's true as long as we're talking about reasonable minhagim which are not based on error from their inception, in which case the minhag is not valid to begin with, and that's also halakha. That is halakha. That says in Shulchan Aruch, it says that. But even if a minhag is valid in a certain time and place, if you leave that place, in other words, if you lived in Poland, and in Poland people didn't eat kitniot, rightly or wrongly, let's not go into that now, they didn't, fine. But now you leave Poland, you go to a place where that's not the minhag, that you don't have a reality where all the Jews don't eat kitniot on Pesach. That minhag, and now you choose to live in that new place, you are no longer required to follow that minhag. That also is written in the Shulchan Aruch. It's based on explicit statements in the Talmud, in Masechet Pesachim, Masechet Hulim, etc. So the halachic infrastructure is there. The tools are there. You just have to be willing to use them or to know how to use them. If you have a great big toolbox full of tools, but you don't know how to use them, then you're really no better off than the person who has no tools at all. Most Rabbanim are in that situation. There are the halachic tools of the Torah Shebaal Peh, as Chazal show us and teach us, are there to be used, but you have to know how to use them, and you have to be willing to use them. You have to be willing to take the drill and plug it in and put in the drill bit and actually make a hole in the wall, which, yes, initially involves a bit of noise and it creates some dust on the floor, which you have to sweep up afterwards, etc. But you'll get your hole that you need, correct? If that's what you need to do. If you're not willing to do these things and deal with the small mess in which it involves, if we speak now about Torah and halachic issues, if you're not willing to deal with a certain, with all that such a shift in Torah thinking would imply, if you're not willing to deal with that, then you refrain. You don't do anything. You don't drill your hole. You haven't got a hole, so you can't hang up your puzzle on the wall, for example. But you wouldn't have made a hole and you didn't make a mess. Fine, you didn't. You're right. But you didn't do what you needed to do, and you won't be able to do it. You'll be paralyzed out of fear that, what's going to happen if we drill that hole? You need to start with a small number of chachamim who understand this, who have the Torah background, the halachic understanding, and the courage and initiative and vision to see this and to put it into practice. If this was done in the right way, slowly, over time, certainly wouldn't happen overnight, there would be certain Jews who would take note of this fact, that here are some people who are really on a different wavelength, and they're making sense, and they know what they're saying. You can see, they explain, they write, it's there, it's not as if we're not making this up. They're not people who haven't learned sufficiently to express these ideas. Eventually some people would get the message. And the more people join, would identify with that outlook and with that way of doing things, slowly that could grow. That's what I said to these people years way back. They thought I was crazy and didn't understand that no, what you have to do is get 71 people and immediately talk about the Mikdash. Of course, what did that lead? Absolutely to zero. Absolutely nothing. So that whole episode and all the discussions that went on for years before that, again, I'm familiar with what went on. And since that time, all that has simply, like trying to hold sand in your hand between your fingers, just slips away. It dissipated and disintegrated, and there's nothing left of it. But it did have one result, a negative result. It further convinced many other people who from the outset said this won't work and it's nonsense. It convinced them even more that they were right, that such a thing can't work. And that's not true. It can work, and it must work. So I'm not suggesting that we start tomorrow with Har HaBayit, but in order to get there, you have to start on a path that leads there, in a rational, logical way. Yes. I'm sorry, this gentleman at the back.
Thank you once again. The idea, when you were answering the question before about the possibility of the Sanhedrin. Well, first of all, if we can even get even a coalition or any political party together, we can't even agree on seemingly anything from the political to the religious. But even so, wouldn't it be difficult, based on the original idea of the Sanhedrin, which came from Yitro, of course?
Which came from where?
Yitro.
Well, in a manner of speaking.
That was kind of like the first one, right?
Sort of, maybe.
Yeah, well, the credentials for it are quite demanding for obvious reasons. And, I just wanted to ask, do you think there's enough people here that have those kinds of,
no, I can answer that question in the affirmative. Yes, there are such people, and I know some such people. A number of them, certainly. Let me remind you that 500 odd years ago, in Tzfat, the Mari Berav, the Rav of the Beth Yosef, Rabbi Yosef Karo, wished to, and in fact did, reinstitute a Sanhedrin, or the Smicha, the concept of Smicha, which is necessary as part of that process. He introduced that, or reintroduced that concept, based on what the Rambam writes, how it should be done. He did that. And this was accepted by almost every single Chacham at that time in Eretz Yisrael, except for a handful here in Yerushalayim, not here, I'm saying here, in Yerushalayim. I lived in Yerushalayim for many years, so force of habit. So there were a couple of Chachamim in Yerushalayim who didn't accept this idea, but at that time 98% of the Chachamim in the country lived in Tzfat, and they all accepted the idea. And they did reintroduce the Smicha. Why did it not continue? For historical reasons, for the same reason that the Yishuv of Jews in Tzfat fell apart, which it did. It was a small, relatively short, brief historical period where there were thousands of Jews living in Tzfat at that time, and there were many Chachamim also, and it was possible to do something, and something was done. When that reality began to unravel, as it did for historical reasons, when the whole institution also unraveled. At any rate, what was the requirement of the Mari Berav and his followers when we're giving someone smicha at that time? Not to know Kol HaTorah Kula by heart, which is really, a tall order. There are a few people perhaps like that as today as well, but that's a very tall order. The requirement was defined as knowing Hilchot Harif U'Mefarshav, which is a much less tall an order. It's something very serious. But to know all the Rif and the Mefaresh around the Rif, to know the basic Shitot, so to know more or less what the discussion's about, and to have an idea of the basic Shitot, the basic halachic approaches to the major practical questions of that time, which is the Rif, talking about what's called Hazman Hazeh, that which is relevant in Galuth, not talking about the Mikdash, by the way. But that was the requirement. It wasn't someone who knows Bavli and Yerushalmi and Tosefta by heart. That wasn't the requirement, and that's something that exists. Yes, it does. I'm not saying every Rav is like that today, but it exists. At any rate, the point is, you have to start with a small number of very serious people who have even a very few real supporters who understand that this thing is for real, it's serious. It may begin now and it may only reach fruition in 2 or 3 generations from now. That's also possible. After all, when Herzl came up with his idea of Zionism, first of all, how many Jews thought at the time that this was a good idea? Handfuls of Jews. Most Jews thought this guy was totally off his rocker. They thought this guy was totally unrealistic, a daydreamer. Nothing would come of this thing. That's number one. Number two, how long did it take from the first Zionist Congress to the establishment of the State of Israel? About 60 years. That's 2 generations plus. All right? You have to think in those terms, at least 2 generations plus. You have to be willing to understand that we're talking about an immense undertaking on the one hand, but not something which is beyond us. It's not crazy, and it has to happen. As the Rebbe Mikotsk once said to his Talmidim, when someone asked him a certain question, he said, "Don't ask me if something is possible. Ask me if it's necessary. If it's necessary, then it has to happen. And it's up to us to figure out how to make it happen." Now, Herzl had an idea, he came up with something, he kicked the ball into play, and things developed. No one could even foresee at that time, at the end of the 19th century, how things would play out several decades later. But they did. And here we are. So you never know exactly how things will play out. You don't have to know. You have to know that this thing is necessary, it's right, it makes sense, and it's our responsibility. And if you accept those facts of life and that responsibility, then you can immediately begin to get to work, and you don't have to hold out for immediate recognition or success overnight. You don't. That's not the way things work. Yeah.
What's the Rav's opinion on the Shita that the Mikdash is in the south of Har Bayit, and also on the rabbis who say that because there are so many different Shitot, we have a Safek D'Oraita. Not only is it a Safek D'Oraita, but it's one that's Efshal Bareh. So in time we could find out. So it doesn't even count as we don't even have any of the kulot that might come with Sfikot, and therefore that Klalei Halakha tell us that we should go to Qumrah on this.
Well, I already said before, I don't believe anyone who tells me he knows for a fact where the Mikdash stood precisely, and I don't think we'll know until we excavate. I'm also convinced that if we do excavate, we'll discover what we need to know in short order, and then we'll be able to. The whole discussion will be based on more factual information. Having said that, the vast majority of serious people who have looked at this issue, as opposed to Rabbanim who have never looked at the issue but are convinced that it's a surah, therefore why discuss it? The vast majority of serious people who have looked into it hold by the Shita that the Mikdash was on the present raised platform where the Golden Dome stands today. And as I said, the Hatham Sofer thought so, the Chazon Ish thought so, and the list is very long. Okay? And I think, if you appreciate the fact that we're not at liberty to do nothing. doing nothing comes with a heavy price, just as doing the wrong thing comes with a heavy price. So we have to be willing to do that which can be done within the framework of the halakha. So if we know for a fact that certain areas are definitely mutar, there's no reason not to go there. In fact, there are very good reasons to go there. It's also part of this breaking of the mold, to get people to think outside the box, to begin to see Har HaBayit as something that is relevant and shayach to us. It belongs to us. And we were supposed to be in charge of that area. And there are certain things that Torah commands us to do in that place called Har HaBayit. If we simply turn it into something which is off limits, something extraterritorial, as it were, doesn't belong in this world, as it were, it's something it's a piece of heaven on earth that we can't enter. Well, then how are we ever going to break the mold? No question, the right thing to do would be to start excavating tomorrow morning. That would be the right thing. That would be the very best thing to do. But as long as that's not about to happen, we have to increase awareness of the Mikdash. And this is one way to do so. Last question, yes?
In order for someone to become part of the 3 founding members of the eventual Sanhedrin, do they need to be considered prominent in the eyes of a significant majority or a near unanimous majority of Torah observant Jews?
It's a very interesting question, and the answer, of course, is yes and no. And it can't be otherwise, because the Jewish world today is so divided and confused that even amongst the Haredim, there's no agreement. If you take the Haredim for a moment, there's no agreement who the biggest names are. Because if you ask a Litai Avrech from Bnei Barak, or for that matter from Yerushalayim, he'll say, well, Rabbi A and Rabbi B. But if you ask one of the breakaway faction in Yerushalayim, they'll say Rabbi C. Correct? If you start talking to Hasidim, you'll start hearing other names and other ideas mentioned. Correct? You know what's going to happen if you talk to a Chabadnik, and that's just that part. That's that section of the Jewish world, and then you start dealing with other parts of the Jewish world. What possible consensus can exist in such a situation? The answer is there cannot be, and there will not be. To imagine that we have to wait for such a consensus is I think a mistake. That would be analogous to Herzl saying, well, I have an idea and I think it's a good idea, but I'm not going to do anything about it until at least 50% of the Jews in the world agree with me that it's a good idea. Well, if that had happened, if that had been the case, then we wouldn't be here and nothing would have taken place. Okay? Yeah.
Okay. So it's not viable, but it is necessary.
No, I don't think that's necessary, because I think, in other words, it would be desirable, certainly. If there was such a consensus in the Torah world, all the different factions and stripes and colors within the Torah world, if that were to be possible, that would be wonderful. But it's not. But it's more than that. You have to understand, it's not possible because these different factions are not even speaking the same language, really. They each have their own, as it were, language, their language of Torah. Just like Chabad have their language and their terminologies and their concepts. The same is true for Lita'im, the same is true for Hasidei Vizhnitz, the same is true for, within the Dati Leumi world, you have people from Merkaz Harav, Har Amor, another yeshiva, this one, that one. There's no end to the different mindsets that exist, and they don't really understand each other, because they're all working with a different set of assumptions. Now, there's a reason for that. The reason for that is confusion, or a lack of understanding of what we're facing. It's like taking a number of people off the street who have never studied civic engineering, and telling them there's a problem with this bridge. Every time we build it, it collapses. Would you like to look at it and tell us what we're doing wrong? Well, each one of these people who doesn't understand how to build a bridge will come up with a different response perhaps, but none of them will have the right answer. The only person who has the right answer, he may be in a minority, and maybe no one's asked him yet, but it's the only person who knows is the person whose business it is, who studied how to build such a bridge, correct? So there's a reason that most of the Jewish world is, everyone's talking at cross purposes and not really hearing what the other person is even saying. There's a reason for this, because they're all coming from a very limited, narrow perspective and version of Judaism. They don't see the big picture, they haven't got the overview, and they haven't got the vision. And they're each of them are working within a certain mold in which they grew up, or into which they were taught to accept, whatever. And therefore, to expect that these different factions and groups, each really living in their own virtual reality almost, will be able to communicate with each other, it's not a realistic expectation. Therefore, you need to find people who understand this, who therefore come to the problem with a different set and the correct set of assumptions, and have the skill set to deal with this issue, whether they fit into one of those boxes or not. Now, if such a group of people begin to work together and begin to publish and make certain statements, and thus attract, slowly but surely, followers, people who understand and accept this way of looking at things and living as Torah Jews, that begins to make waves in the world, in the Jewish world. People begin to hear there's this new force, there's this new reality out there in the Jewish world, and it's very different from everything else we've heard before. But let's check it out. Let's find out what it's about. That's how I think it will work. That's how I think it has to work.
And instead of 12 factions, you've got 13.
Why? Why 13?
It's just arbitrary. No.
Oh, okay. Well, it could be. I think 13 is fantastic. I think we have about 100. If 13 is only 13, maybe we can make a deal somehow. 100 is we have so many variations on the theme, but they're all on the same theme. Galut Mo Judaism. Many variations, but it's all the same theme. And we need a different theme altogether, a different paradigm. You had a question?
Yeah.
Go on.
One is just short question, then I have a general question. One, we said that too much Puya of the Tzibur.
Yes.
Why do we not make this argument when it comes to going on to Har Bayit today? Everyone's telling me.
Because, okay. Well, first of all, there are some people who make this, who make such a claim. Their claim is, I don't accept this claim, but there are those who claim that what we're doing today, going up to Har Bayit, is actually a kind of kibush. We're engaged in an act of kibush of Har Bayit, which is it's a part of Eretz Yisrael which has been left unconquered, as it were, which is entirely true, by the way. I accept that. It's not really conquered. It's not really under our control. Those who claim that it is, I think, are simply fooling themselves. And the situation today is worse than it was 30 years ago. There are those who claim, therefore, this is an act of kibush, and as such, we are allowed to go to Har Bayit whether we're tameh or tahor. It makes no difference, because this is an essential part of the mitzvah of building the Mikdash and kibush Eretz Yisrael, and this is the die part of Eretz Yisrael, and it's more than that. And if that's what it takes to get the Jews back to Har Bayit, then that's what we need to do. The problem with that, in my view, is that Jews have been going on to Har Bayit essentially, more or less, at the beginning in small numbers and slowly over time in increasing numbers. Jews have been entering Har Bayit, religious Jews, people who went to the mikveh and what have you, since shortly after Milchemet Sheshet Hayamim. In actual fact, I knew one of the original people who went on to Har Bayit at that time. And yet we see that this has been going on for 5 or 4 decades certainly, and it hasn't really changed the situation. In other words, to say that I'm doing something now as an act of kibush, and maybe in 70 years down the road it will result in a change, maybe and maybe not, that doesn't strike me as something you can define as kibush. An act of kibush has to be something which, the likelihood at least, there's a definite probability that this will lead within a certain foreseeable span of time to a result. The result that you want. Right now, it's a tactic. It's an important. The idea is good, and it does raise awareness, and I'm for that. But to claim it's an act of kibush, unfortunately, that's not true. For that to happen, you need a change of government or a change of regime. In actual fact, and that will only happen when more Jews accept that other way of looking at Torah that we've been discussing. When more Jews think in those terms and reject the Rabbanut Rashit set up by David Ben Gurion, precisely for the purpose of putting these datim into a nice little official ghetto. We'll keep them there, we'll pay them some salaries, we'll get them out of our hair, we'll keep them happy, and we'll get on with the business of doing what we want to do. That was exactly the purpose of creating the Rabbanut Rashit as it exists today. It's not exactly the same as the Rabbanut Rashit in the days of Rav Kook. It was different, because there wasn't a Medinat Yisrael way back then, and things were very different for many reasons. It wasn't so wonderful then either, perhaps, but it's not what it is today. Today it's an embarrassment, frankly. And it certainly doesn't achieve anything very, very of any note, of any significance. What it does do, again, it's like going about trying to establish a Sanhedrin the wrong way. If you do it the wrong way, you're going to end up convincing more people that such a thing is hopeless, and therefore why bother even talking about it. In the same way, if you set up a body like that, which is so remiss in doing what a true Torah establishment should do, then you simply convince more people that the Torah has nothing to say, nothing of value to say. That's Torah. Well, we don't want it. Thank you very much. So it's actually it's more harmful. It brings more harm than good. So again, if we believe in the Torah, if we believe in ourselves, if we believe that when we do the right thing, eventually Hashem will bring about a situation which will allow, the circumstances will allow us to move things forward and to succeed. If we believe in that, which we must believe, because that's how Jewish history has always worked, then we are able and must go about this business of creating that alternative. As a final idea, Jewish history, in my view, should be viewed as a kind of wave like a sine wave on a screen, right, up and down. Hashem brings about certain historical realities and circumstances that change over time. Sometimes we're at the top of a wave, and sometimes we're going down with the trough, and then we go up again. In order to succeed, you have to be prepared. You have to way ahead of time. You have to build the infrastructure, the ideas, the organization, the education involved, so that you have that critical mass of people and of chachamim and people with that vision and that yearning for these ideas, so that when you find yourself on the rise, when the wave is in your favor and it's going up, and you can ride that wave, then you'll be able to implement what you've been thinking about and planning for so long. But when the opportunity arrives and you're totally flat-footed, you don't hit the ground running, you're on your back, lying on your back, and the situation is there, and you haven't even thought about it, what's going to happen? Nothing. That's exactly what happened to us in Sheshet Hayamim. We found ourselves in control of large areas, not all of, but large areas of Eretz Yisrael, including the most important part of Eretz Yisrael, Har HaBayit, Yerushalayim. And not only was the state of Israel, the secular establishment, unprepared and disinterested, Even the religious world was unprepared and disinterested. In other words, the failure there was what happened in all the years prior to that war, that we hadn't educated people for what we'll do when the time comes. You can't always precipitate that reality that will be necessary, that situation which will be required so that you can do certain things. But eventually that will come about. But you have to be prepared. So let us prepare now for the wave of the future. Kol Tov. We said to me, we need a book of halakha that is brief, concise, precise, based on what Chazal said, without added chumrot. I said, okay, well, what's the problem? It's called the Rambam. Now, it sounds like a witticism, and it is in some ways. It also happens to be at least 80% true. It's not 100% true, because I'm not a Rambamist. In other words, I don't claim that the Rambam is always right no matter what. It just so happens that the last couple of days, until this morning, I was writing certain things to do with the Sidur and Sacharat Yisrael that I'm working on, in which I'm proving that the Rambam's wrong about something. And it's not my idea that's wrong. The Ravad, the Benutam, and the Ran, and the list is very long who said that on this particular point, the Rambam is mistaken. I don't believe the Rambam can always be correct, because no one can always be correct. That's the nature of, that's the human condition. But has anyone succeeded in creating a better basic text of halakha that the average person can learn and make some sense of and work with? The answer is no. The Rambam is something which no one else has been able to replicate. And particularly today, when you have versions of the Rambam with these very brief but very well written and very lucid explanation, so that you can read it and walk away with having understood at least 90% of it, then it's a tremendous tool that the Jewish world has that they didn't have in the past. Because in the past, I know, the fact is that most people, without such a pirush, reading the Rambam, line by line, chapter after chapter, even a person who knows a little bit would perhaps understand 60-70% of what he was reading and not understand the rest. Which is also a great thing, by the way, because understanding 70% of the whole picture is a lot. But there's still 30% that you're missing. Today, you can really bring that percentage up to 90 or more percent with these pirushim that exist. I'm talking about Mishneh Torah Shalem, and I'm talking about the Rambam, it's called put out by Koren with the Perush, right? These are very good tools, and I recommend them to all people. If we accept something along those lines, without any kind of hasidut, that we always follow the Rambam, we always follow this, we don't. Because there are certain things where people who know can tell you this, on this point, it's probably better not to follow the Rambam, probably better to follow Rabbi David. Okay, so there are such things, no question. But if we accept some kind of system as the foundation, and then if that was the accepted foundation of Jewish practice today, shall we say, something along those lines, with having removed all kinds of minhagim, many of which were never correct, and some of which are maybe correct in their original place of origin, but today they're just going to cause all this chatter that we see today, where everyone's working in different terms and you're working with different systems. This person follows the Mishnah Ra, he follows the Danish High, and this one follows the Chazon, and he follows I don't know what, something else. That kind of system is not conducive to reconstituting a Jewish nation. That's not only conducive; it guarantees paralysis and confusion, and that's what we need to move away from.
So, how do you actually get everybody to follow the same basic halakha?
I don't know how to go about forcing people to do that. It's not a question of coercion, but you can. I think you need to begin by telling people there is such a thing. In other words, there is a healthy and workable halachic system based on the primary sources of halakha. which we can work with and should be working with, and demonstrate and show why this is a better system and more correct than what's something else that people might be working with today. And if enough people, certain people will begin to see what I think, and some people I think already have, and they'll go on, they'll be interested in such a system. That's all. If such a thing, however, is hijacked or taken to an extreme, as some of the Rambamistim do, that they discount anyone else who's not called a Rambam. So Rashi didn't know anything, and the Ravad didn't know anything, and the Rashba's opinion is of no concern to us. If that's their opinion, which it is in many of them, then that's an extreme, unhinged, and
idolatrous.
It's almost idolatrous. It's a system which is not serious. A serious person won't accept that, and therefore will again. When you do things in the wrong way, you convince people that there's no truth at all in what you were suggesting. There is some truth in what they're suggesting, but not in that extreme and unbalanced way. Understand? All right.
The production of these videos and maintaining this channel demands much time and money. If you enjoyed this video, please show your appreciation and support. To make a donation, please go to www.machonshilo.org and press the PayPal button which appears on the upper right hand side of the home page. To sponsor a video or purchase Birkon Nusach Eretz Yisrael, please write us at office@machonshilo.org.